Traditionally, security has been seen as an afterthought for developers. I mean, they focus on business value of their application, not on security. Security was never their problem. It was always someone else's problem. But things are different in cloud. I think in the last 1 or 2 years, there has been so much awareness around security. And we are seeing, emergence of things like DevSecOps. To discuss not only security in this cloud and how things are changing, we're also going to talk about how platforms like GitHub are enabling developers to include security into their workflow. So today we have with us Gray Baker, Director of Product Management at GitHub. First of all, Gray, welcome to the show.
Hi, it's great to be here.
First of all, tell me, do you agree with this assessment that traditionally security has not been, the primary focus of developers, and that now things are changing?
I think that's absolutely true. Historically, what we've seen is security being its own separate team with its own separate workflow, and it hasn't been embedded really anywhere close to the developer workflow. And, there's reasons for that, and we can get into it. But absolutely, that was the case over the last couple of decades. And then more recently, it's beginning to change. We've had this huge DevOps movement over the last 10 years. And more recently, people are starting to talk about DevSecOps and combining security into that and making it the responsibility of the development team, but also part of their standard developer workflow. So yeah, things are changing.
What contribute to this change?
When I look at it, I think the big thing is the tooling has made it possible. The thing about security is the expertise that we have in this space is so limited in terms of number of people. Security researchers are outnumbered by developers by about 500 to 1. So if you want to talk about embedding security in the developer workflow, you really need a solution that's going to be automated and that's going to scale. And until the last couple of years, we haven't really had solutions that allow us to do that. Then a few years ago, we started getting to that point with scanning for open source software components. And that's the kind of easy stuff on security. And now the tooling is being built out more and more to embed more and more elements of security into that developer workflow.
GitHub is kind of one of the most popular platforms for code creation and contribution. So it's a very critical piece of workflow CI/CD pipeline. If you look at what are the tools available for developers so that they can very easily embrace security into their workflow. Can you talk about that?
Sure can. So we just launched one of these a few months ago called Code Scanning at GitHub Satellite. And it's about doing exactly that. So GitHub comes at this. We are really a developer-first company from the outset. What we build is the developer tool that developers live in. So, we're always thinking about how do you embed new things into that flow. And recently, security has been our focus. So we launched Code Scanning, which automatically scans every single commit that a developer makes for a bunch of patterns that could signal a vulnerability. It's been very successful in terms of finding vulnerabilities for a number of enterprise customers of ours, and we wanted to make it more widely available. It came from the technology that we acquired last year with the acquisition of Semel.
There are already a lot of tools. Most of them are open source. There is a ecosystem now which is kind of working on security itself. So there are a lot of things at disposal of developers. So now there are two pieces. One is that you are baking a lot of tools that they can leverage. At the same time, they can also leverage tools which are being developed by the larger community. So how do you make it easy for them to kind of mix and match and get best of both worlds?
Yeah, sure. Security is a big space, and we need a really broad tent in if we're really going to help people develop more secure applications. And, that's the goal here, is to have more secure applications, because at the end of the day, I don't want my credentials to be involved in the next data breach. So in order to do that, we've got a kind of two-pronged approach at GitHub. And the first part of that is always at GitHub extensibility. Everything that we build should be really easy to plug into. We want to make it easy for open source solutions and for third parties to integrate their tools into the developer workflow. And then the second part is providing tools that we have built ourselves. So we looked at the world of static analysis scans and what was available out there. And this is a really hard problem. This is something where you need a big team, and that team needs a lot of experience, PhDs in program analysis in order to really make progress in this field. And that kind of investment is kind of expensive. But we decided that we wanted to go down that path and have a tool that we thought was kind of best of breed. So that's why we acquired Semel. We've taken that technology, we've made it free for anybody to run on open source because, like I said, the goal here is to build more secure software and reduce the number of vulnerabilities in our ecosystem. And then as a proprietary tool for enterprises.
There is one thing that we wanted to talk about is code scanning. Talk a bit about what is code scanning and what does it do? If you can just talk a bit about the whole workflow, how it looks like.
Yeah, sure thing. So if you are a security expert, then code scanning is static analysis embedded into GitHub. If you are the majority of people that has no idea what SAST and static analysis means, then I'll talk it through. Basically, every time you push code to GitHub, with code scanning, we will check that out and we will run what is equivalent to a set of unit tests that are around security rather than around correctness. What those tests do is they're queries against the kind of data representation of your code. And they look for any places where, for example, you've got data flowing from user input, a source, to a place where it could be used in a way that's problematic. Let's say inserted into your database, and check whether or not you've got any sanitizers along the way to make sure that's safe. And if it finds any of those that have been introduced or affected by the push that you've just made, it'll cause an alert. And if it's in a pull request on GitHub, then it'll surface a little alert in that pull request, just like having your security team review that pull request would, saying, hey, we've noticed that this might be introducing an SQL injection vulnerability, for example. So every single push that you make to GitHub gets scanned by the equivalent of a security team, except that it's all automated testing. Now, the really cool stuff here is, one, the scans that we do, so those queries, they're all open source. The underlying engine is something that we've acquired and invested, and it's got over 100 years of engineering hours building it. But the queries, the ability to model a security concern, that is all open source. Those are all MIT. So any security researcher from any big company or any individual can go in and contribute or improve those. And we've had contributions from Google, we've had them from Facebook, we've had them from SAP, we've had them from the world's top security teams, all working together to create a single suite of security checks that you can apply on any code base, on any push to GitHub, and get the notifications directly in your developer workflow. So that's the idea behind code scanning, and we're really excited about it. One of the things that GitHub is proudest of in its entire history is the creation of the pull request. That idea of making an easy place to collaborate on code and collaborate with strangers on a contribution. And it's no coincidence that we've chosen the pull request as the place to integrate code scanning. So any push that you make to a repository that is using code scanning that introduces anything that looks like it could be a vulnerability, well, that's going to get an alert direct from code scanning. And you're going to see the power of that technology first person. And it's our way of standing behind what we've built here. Because if you don't think that the alerts that you see on the popular repositories that are running this, and there are already some really popular ones, the Ruby language, for example, is already running code scanning on every single commit. If you don't see value in those alerts, then you're not going to turn it on and you're not going to think this is good. But we're confident that this technology really does find novel vulnerabilities that you would not have spotted unless you have deep security expertise, and that it doesn't surface a lot of false positives. So it's not going to get in your way as a developer. So when it comes to distribution, we're kind of putting our product first by making it available for free on open source and talking to our largest maintainers about what will make this work for them so that anybody can see it in action.
And GitHub also has public and private repository. A lot of enterprise, they run it into. So is that anything different change? Because sometimes they have more control over the private repositories.
The only difference on code scanning is if it's for a private repository, you've got to pay for it. Whereas we're giving this away for free to all public repositories. So as I said, we want open source to have the world's best tooling on security.
This is one of the many things that GitHub is doing, in security realm, security space. Can you talk about, what are the other areas that you will be focusing on when it comes to security?
GitHub has had an offering in the supply chain security space for the last couple of years. That's the dependency alerts that we'll send you if we find a vulnerability in any of your dependencies, and the pull request that we'll send you to fix it. We've recently become the CNA for open source that's hosted on GitHub. That means that if you want to have a CVE issued for a vulnerability as a maintainer, then you come directly to GitHub to get that issued. And that's the best practice way to then notify all of your users. And we make the database that we have of all of those vulnerabilities available for free to everybody. So that's what we're doing in the supply chain space. We have more stuff coming there about checking whether or not you're actually vulnerable to a vulnerability in one of your dependencies, whether you've been exposed to that vulnerability. And we'll be keeping to kind of push forward the dependency scanning space. Then we think about static analysis, so scanning your own code, and that's what we've introduced code scanning for. We're going to be continuing to build the community of researchers that contribute to that analysis and making that analysis better and better as more and more of the world's largest code bases start using it. We also have plans to make it easy for folks to integrate other kinds of security tooling. So, for example, people talk about dynamic analysis, which is kind of like the tooling that a pen tester or penetration tester would use when they were working to find security vulnerabilities in an application. We want to make it easy to surface those vulnerability details in GitHub. So kind of watch that space over the next 12 months. And then the final thing that you touched on a little bit earlier is around the policy that you might have within a company of how development is done in order to make sure that it's always secure, in order to make sure that you've always got the review you need, perhaps extra review if somebody is dismissing a security vulnerability as a false positive or doing something that affects the database. We're building out a kind of config as code solution for GitHub that'll allow you to fully define the policies that you have in your organization and in future to enforce them as well. So to easily say, okay, any pull request where the database schema gets changed, that needs to be reviewed by our database management team. We're going to make blocking pull requests on that kind of condition easy and a reality on GitHub.
When you look at supply chain, you can keep your code up to date, patched, but sometimes they're not applied, they're not pushed. How to solve that problem?
Oh, man. Yeah. So, well, actually, before I joined GitHub, I built a company called Dependabot that automatically creates pull requests, so creates the patch to update you to a newer version of a dependency. And the idea was to make this easy because the reason that we don't apply those patches as engineers is because it feels like, tedious work. And, we've got other priorities. And so if we can make that easy enough, it makes a huge difference. We've seen at GitHub, we've sent about 1 million of these automated pull requests to fix vulnerabilities. The fix rate for those vulnerabilities, if you get a pull request versus if you just get an alert, it doubles. So making it easy to do the right thing, that's huge.
GitHub is also kind of home to a lot of projects that are hosted by open source foundation like Linux Foundation or CNCF. And Linux Foundation has CII. They have a lot of CNCF is working a lot. So are you also working, because GitHub is also involved with a lot of these projects. So are you also kind of working on or involved with some of these projects also outside of the work that you are internally doing at GitHub in security space?
Yeah, we are. We try to engage the community as much as possible on anything that we're doing. And that includes security, but any major feature development that we're working on or anywhere where we see a way that we can help the open source community, we want to be involved. In the security space, the GitHub Security Labs Coalition is our best example of that. But there are examples across GitHub where we're reaching out and working with the community to build the tooling that they need.
Awesome. Great. Thank you so much for taking your time out and sitting down or standing here today with me to talk about security in GitHub. And I look forward to talk to you again because security is going to be one of the, not only the hottest topics, but a very, very critical piece of cloud native, journey that we're talking about. So once again, thank you.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks for having me.